UFC 252 Miocic versus Cormier 3 was an amazing night of fights, and we're going to be going through the entire main card, giving the next fights to make for each the winner and the loser of each respected fight on the main card. And what an amazing main card it was. We're going to start with the main event, Stipe Miocic versus Daniel Cormier. The fights to make next are Stipe Miocic versus Francis Ngannou 2. We'll start with the winner. Stipe Miocic should definitely be defending against Francis Ngannou next. I don't know how much more Ngannou can do to earn his title shot back. I mean, he went through literally so many different guys to get back to this point, including beating Jairzinho Rozenstruik, which now looks really good. He beat Junior Dos Santos. He beat Cain Velasquez. Like, how many more guys do we have to throw at him? He beat Curtis Blades again for good measure, now twice. How many more things does Ingarnu have to destroy before we give him a title shot? I feel like Stipe versus Ingarnu should be happening next. I know John Jones was up tweeting about moving up to heavyweight again. I'm sure you want to move up John Jones. We know how that works out. John Jones says he wants to move up to heavyweight, then he doesn't, and then he stays at light heavyweight. So I think we're going to see John Jones defend against maybe Dominic Reyes in a rematch, or Jan Blachowicz. He will take on one more light heavyweight bout though, that is for sure. And then we're going to see Stipe Miocic versus Francis Ngannou, because otherwise, if you give Ngannou another fight to take in the meantime, first of all, you're risking losing Ngannou for a title shot, because we really need to capitalize on that business right now. Stipe versus Ngannou 2 is now a way bigger fight than the first one was. Ngannou's name value has doubled since that first time he went for the belt, and Stipe Miocic's as well, because he's now, before, he was just a defending champion looking to break the record of heavyweight world title defenses against Ingarnu, but now we've got Ingarnu coming up against literally the greatest heavyweight of all time. Great sales pitch there. Stipe versus Ingarnu 2 is the fight to make next, and then we'll move on with DC. Different situation. I'm not going to be saying a name of a person here for DC to be taking on next. He should take on retirement. I don't want to see DC get back in there. I know that Dana White said that I'm sure DC's going to feel like he doesn't want to end it on that note. It's kind of evil when they say things like that, because that's kind of like Dana White poking at DC, because he knows full well that DC's going to watch the post-fight interviews and stuff like that, because if I was a fighter, I'd be watching all of the post-fight interviews with Dana White, seeing what he's saying about me. Dana's just prodding at DC, trying to get him emotional about losing his last fight, wanting him to make another turnaround. I don't think DC's going to do that. I think he should retire, don't take on anyone else, and if you do want to take on someone else, I genuinely don't know what there is for him to do at the moment. He doesn't fit in anywhere. If he won, maybe there would be another fight to make between DC and someone else. But if he lost, which he did, there was never really going to be any good matchups to make. I mean, who do we give him to? A top 5 heavyweight contender coming off, what, DC versus Junior Dos Santos? Like, we're not going to do this. Like, if DC won, maybe I could see them luring him into a John Jones DC super fight or something like that just for the money. But he's lost. Let's let it go, DC. You've just taken a big beating against Stipe as well. Almost got TKO'd. That eye injury is probably going to be something that's going to last him a long time as well. Hopefully he doesn't need surgery or anything for that. A little bit of karma because Stipe needed it too. But still, I don't think DC should take on anyone. Retire. And this is what Chael Sonnen said in one of the post-fight interviews. And I so much agree with this. Fair enough, you're second place. But Daniel Cormier is literally the 3rd baddest man on the planet. Actually, no, the 4th baddest man on the planet, because Dominic Reyes is number 2. But DC's literally, actually, maybe the 5th. We're getting a little bit low now, but still, DC is just 2nd place to the greatest heavyweight of all time and the greatest light heavyweight of all time. And by the way, he's took belts in both of their divisions. You're okay, DC. You've had a great career. Retire. Have your battles with obesity instead, because we know how much DC likes to plump up in between his training camps. But still, go into the commentary. You're a good commentator. Go into the UFC behind the scenes area, because you're really good at that as well. And maybe work for your domination to take over the UFC eventually as UFC president. I know that's something Daniel Cormier is probably going to be very interested in once Dana White is gone. If Dana White ever leaves, it doesn't feel like he's going to be dying anytime soon. But still, Daniel Cormier, no more fights, time to retire. You had an amazing career, but Stipe versus Ngannou needs to happen next. Moving on, down the card. Marlon Vera won the fight against Sean O'Malley, and I want to address this as well in this little video in case, because I didn't do it in my reaction, because I did my reaction immediately, and I don't get to see everything that happened. Marlon Vera landed a good leg kick on Sean O'Malley. It hurt Sean O'Malley's leg, leading him to step on it funnily, And then once he stepped on it funny, that's when the injury happens. Like, it's not that Marlon Vera completely debilitated his leg and it was destroyed from the second that Marlon Vera kicked his leg. But Marlon Vera did lead to the domino effect of that injury happening. So it is a win for Marlon Vera. And a lot of people, including myself, were saying, Sean O'Malley just injured himself, ruined his foot, but a leg kick did land. And whether or not Marlon Vera was planning on completely destroying the foot of Sean O'Malley when he threw it, I mean, obviously he's going to be planning to do some damage. But that reaction, I'm sure he wasn't expecting after one little kick to the knee. Still, he did land a kick. That's a TKO win for Marlon Vera. He definitely got the job done. Sean O'Malley did injure himself, but that was subsequent to an original harming process of Marlon Vera attacking his leg. Then Sean O'Malley took a funny step because he'd just been leg kicked. Then he rolled his ankle. So it was a leading domino effect. Marlon Vera gets the job done against Sean O'Malley. That's my new opinion on how the fight went anyway. But still, Marlon Vera should take on Jimmie Rivera next. This fight was signed not too long ago. I believe it was signed at the start of the year. This was the fight that was supposed to be happening. Jimmie Rivera ended up pulling out, I believe. Ended up having the old Rona syndrome. And Marlon Vera looked to take on Song Yadong instead. Marlon Vera versus Jimmie Rivera is the fight to make because they're both coming off wins. They're both needing one more big win before they get a massive jump up the rankings in similar positions. Marlon Vera versus Jimmie Rivera. I was originally thinking maybe Jose Aldo or Rafael Assunção, but they're coming off losses. You know, we don't normally do that. We don't do losers versus winners and winners versus losers. I say they do Rafael Dos Santos, sorry. I say they do Rafael Assunção versus maybe a Munoz versus Edgar loser. And then maybe they do a Jose Aldo versus Uriah Faber too. Something like that. But for Marlon Vera, look to take on Jimmie Rivera because I feel like the only thing that Marlon Vera is going to really care about is what number is next to these people's names. And if Jimmie Rivera was willing to take on Marlon Vera before, I'm sure he's going to be willing to take him on again now that Marlon Vera is a huge name that he is right now after beating Sean O'Malley. Jimmie Rivera versus Marlon Vera makes all the sense in the world to me. And for Sean O'Malley, the Sugar Show. It was good. It was a good time and it's going to continue. We're going to have another season come round, I'm sure. But Sean O'Malley, cover up from your injury, recover well, take a couple months. I don't want to see Sean O'Malley until maybe February earliest. I think he should definitely take 6 months off. And the thing is, with his youth, he's able to take 6 months off. Like, you can take some time off, Sean O'Malley, come back in February, and I want to see him take on the Simone versus Kelleher winner. Simone and Kelleher taking each other on, I believe, maybe at the end of this month, or maybe in next month, in September or something like that. But Simone versus Kelleher is taking place, I believe it's taking place. And if it isn't taking place, then it should take place. But I'm very certain. Let me check if Ricky Simone is actually taking on Brian Kelleher. Because I'm sure I saw an announcement about that not too long ago. Why can't they just give me Tapology straight away? Why is Sherdog at the top of the fucking list? I actually hate Sherdog. Fuck Sherdog. Anyway, Tapology. Ricky Simone versus Brian Kelleher. When's it taking place? 20 days from now. That doesn't help me. Don't let me do maths. Just tell me the date. Tell me the date. UFC Fight Night Overeem versus Sakai. Start of February, September 5th. Great matchup. Ricky Simone versus Brian Kelleher. Winner turn around early next year. Take on Sean O'Malley. I don't want to see Sean O'Malley take a step far back and take on just someone unranked coming off a loss. I don't think he's in a position to be able to do that anymore. And I also feel as though the winner of Ricky Simone versus Brian Kelleher, if it's Ricky Simone, which it could be, is probably going to be ranked number 15 because he, even though it was a weird situation, he technically has a win over Merab, and Merab's going to be jumping up those rankings now after his win against Dawson. Ricky Simone versus Kelleher winner versus Sean O'Malley. I think it makes all the sense in the world. And if it's Brian Kelleher, I know for a fact that he's going to be calling out Sean O'Malley if he wins against Ricky Simone. I'm looking forward to it. That's the matchup that should take place next. Plus, they're both interesting style matchups for O'Malley because they're both quite good at grappling. Moving on. Jairzinho Rozenstruik versus Overeem Sakai winner. Jairzinho Rozenstruik, great performance against Junior Dos Santos. TKO'd him in the second round because Dos Santos is stupid. But Jairzinho Rozenstruik should take on the winner of Overeem versus Sakai. I feel like we're far enough removed from the original Overeem match. There's controversy there. Was it a weird stoppage? Overeem was winning the whole fight before Rozenstruik landed the big punch. Now has Rozenstruik improved enough with his grappling to avoid doing the same thing he did in the first fight, which was getting taken down the whole time? Interesting questions will be answered. Jairzinho Rozenstruik versus the winner of Overeem versus Sakai makes all the sense in the world to me. And also, freebie here for matchmaking. Junior Dos Santos, if he still wants to fight, which I'm assuming he does because he'll probably die. He's one of those guys. I don't see him losing the passion for fighting anymore. He was in the best shape we've ever seen him in for a long time coming into this one, so I'm sure the drive is still there. Junior Dos Santos should take on the loser of Overeem versus Sakai. If it's Augusto Sakai, you get a Brazilian showdown, maybe a passing of the torch, who knows, to bounce Sakai back. And if it's Junior Dos Santos versus Overeem, you get a rematch. Controversial first fight. If you remember, there was a little bit of a weird stoppage there as well. Jairzinho Rozenstruik versus the Overeem Sakai winner. Junior Dos Santos versus the Overeem Sakai loser. Makes sense to me. Daniel Pineda versus Grant Dawson. Pineda had a great performance against Herbert Burns, a grappling heavy featherweight as well. What better guy to make a little bit of an interesting matchup with Grant Dawson than Daniel Pineda? Not to mention, Grant Dawson seems to be interested in taking catchweight fights. Daniel Pineda cut 27 pounds the week of this card to make weight, and he wants to stay active as well. I could honestly see them doing Daniel Pineda versus Grant Dawson in November, in December, once Daniel Pineda's healed up a little bit. I'm sure he's got a few cuts on his face that he wants to heal up, but other than that, he didn't really take too much damage. Daniel Pineda versus Grant Dawson is a great matchup to make, only because it's a big jump up for Daniel Pineda to keep him at the top of those rankings, because he's going to be quite highly ranked immediately here with a big win over Herbert Burns, who on some websites was ranked in the top 20 after his win against Nate Landwehr, because Nate Landwehr beat Darren Elkins. Daniel Pineda versus Grant Dawson. I like it. I especially like it because Daniel Pineda just showed us that he can hang with good grapplers and he can dominate them himself. I like the matchup. Daniel Pineda, Grant Dawson, it will answer a lot of questions for the pair of them. Herbert Burns, on the other hand, versus Ricardo Lamas versus not Uriah Hall. The Ricardo Lamas versus Ryan Hall loser. That would be a great matchup. Herbert Burns, still older guy, past his prime already. I'm sure they're not really going to want to set him back too far to take on some of these bottom feeders. He's a little bit too good for that. Plus, his win and how high ranked he is overall outside those rankings, he is still probably going to be top 30, top 25. You're going to have to give him someone quite high up the rankings. And the loser of Lamas versus Hall, which is coming up again in a few weeks' time, I believe in 2 weeks' time actually, on the 29th of August, if I remember correctly, would be a great matchup for Herbert Burns. They need to take some time off, though. Herbert Burns needs to take a little bit of time. I'd like to see him back in there January, February, December versus the loser of Ricardo Lamas versus Ryan Hall. Almost said Uriah again. Moving on to the opener of the main card. John Dodson should take on Benavidez or Formiga at flyweight, because guess what? Cody Garbrandt is 1-3 in his last 4 fights, 3 of which coming by way of TKO loss. He's fighting for the belt at flyweight. You don't need to have too much of a stake at flyweight to jump immediately into that division right at the deep end. I think John Dodson versus Joseph Benavidez for Benavidez' retirement bout would be a great one. Listen, if John Dodson wins, he looked like a flyweight against Merab. But if he wins against Benavidez, top 3 flyweight looking for a title elimination bout or title shot. And there's a little bit more interest in the flyweight division. I think John Dodson, it's time for you to move back down. I said win or lose against Merab, he should look to go back down. But now that he's lost, maybe he's lost the opportunity to take on Joseph Benavidez straight away. But I could easily see a matchup between him and Jose Formiga made up next instead. Either one of those matchups makes sense. John Dodson versus Benavidez or Formiga to bounce back and look to get in the flyweight rankings and create some interest in that division, because right now, flyweight's picking up some steam. We've got some good matchups being made. Moving on. Merab Dvalishvili. Oh my god, I said Dodson first. He lost. But still, Merab Dvalishvili. The winner against John Dodson. I think he should take on Cody Stamann. Perfect matchup. Make it in December. Cody Stamann coming off a loss right now, so normally I wouldn't make this kind of matchup, but it just seems like, unless we're going to give Merab Rob Font, which wouldn't be too much of a jump up for him. I mean, Merab might even be ranked above Rob Font right now, because Rob Font really doesn't have any relevant wins at the moment. He has a win over Ricky Simone, which is kind of good. Other than that, a win over Thomas Almeida. I mean, Rob Font's been inactive for a while, so I could see that ranking start to degrade. I feel like that's not really what Merab's going to be looking for, and I think what Merab should be looking to take on is Cody Stamann. A great grappler too, with good striking, another interesting matchup, and Cody Stamann's kind of left out in the middle right now with no matchups to make. Cody Stamann versus Merab Dvalishvili sounds good to me. Merab gets a jump up the rankings. Cody Stamann gets a chance to bounce back in a decently good matchup for himself. I mean, a grappler, a grinder. Cody Stamann likes those kind of fights. Stamann versus Merab sounds good to me. The winner of that one will get another jump up the rankings. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed my matchmaking. Like and subscribe. Click that button there. Goodbye. See you later. And by the way, my predictions for Frankie Edgar versus Pedro Munoz card are coming out soon. The resurrection is real. I'm about to go flawless. Because that 252 card was just... It was molestation from start to finish. I just had all of my dignity taken away from me. But we're going to bounce back. Just like Olenek didn't. We're going to bounce back. The resurrection is real. Stay tuned tomorrow for my full card predictions for Pedro Munoz versus Frankie Edgar Fight Night. Thank you for watching. Click that button there again. And like and subscribe. Goodbye.